haunting fare. It was 2 a.m., and Peter, an Uber driver, was sitting in his car, waiting for his last duty of the night. The night had been long, and he was starting to feel sleepy. Just as he was about to nod off, his phone rang, indicating a nearby taxi booking. To shake off his sleepiness, Peter splashed some water on his face and headed towards the pickup location, which was about a mile away. Following the directions, he took a right turn and found himself on a deserted road. The road was a bit rough and dark, but Peter just wanted to complete his last ride and go home, so he drove on without thinking much. The booking was under the name Chris, but when Peter reached the pickup spot, he saw a girl in a beautiful blue western dress waving him down. It looked like she was coming from or going to a late-night party. She got into the front seat instead of the back, which Peter found a bit odd since passengers, especially women traveling alone, usually sit in the back. Ignoring this, Peter started the trip. The destination was a hospital, about 4 miles away. Curious, Peter asked the girl why she was heading to the hospital so late and if everything was okay. At first, the girl ignored him and didn't respond. After a while, she said, "My husband is admitted to the hospital." Hearing this, Peter felt sympathy for her. The girl remained silent, staring out the window. Peter understood she was troubled and perhaps didn't want to talk much. He too remained silent and continued driving. After a while, the girl spoke again. 2 years ago, on this very night, my husband and I were returning from a party just like this." She paused, then added, "We were so happy that day." But then, she fell silent again. Peter, curious and a bit concerned, prompted, "But what?" The girl didn't respond. Peter glanced nervously at her and then noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. The girl was not visible in it. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the girl sitting next to him might not be an ordinary passenger, but perhaps a wandering spirit. He tried to stay calm and thought of a plan. Peter suddenly slammed on the brakes, causing the car to jerk to a stop. The girl looked at him angrily. He got out of the car, pretending to check for a problem, planning to say the car had broken down and arrange another ride for her. But when he turned back, the girl was not in the car, nor was she anywhere nearby. Fear gripped Peter as he quickly got back into the car and sped away. He just wanted to get home as soon as possible. But suddenly, the same girl appeared in front of his car again. Peter stopped the car, and to his horror, the girl transformed into a terrifying witch. Summoning his courage, Peter restarted the car and drove straight through her. He sped up, pushing the car to 130 kilometers per hour. But when he looked in the rearview mirror, he saw the witch chasing him. No matter how fast he drove, she was right behind him. Peter was terrified and stopped looking back. But the witch's reflection appeared in his side mirrors, her eyes burning with a malevolent glare. Peter lost control of the steering wheel, and his car skidded and crashed into a divider. Amazingly, the crash happened right in front of the hospital, where the girl's drop-off location was supposed to be. The loud sound of Peter's accident drew some hospital staff running towards him. Peter was found unconscious and injured, and the witch had vanished. He was admitted to the same hospital. When Peter regained consciousness, he asked the hospital staff if a man named Chris was admitted there. A nurse, hearing this, was a bit startled. After hearing Peter's entire story, she told him that 2 years ago, on the same night, a man named Chris had an accident similar to Peter's. Chris and his wife were both severely injured in the accident. Chris didn't survive, but the doctors managed to save his wife. The nurse explained that Chris's wife had mentioned their accident was caused by a drunk driver. When they asked the driver to stop, he got aggressive, leading to the fatal crash. The nurse further revealed that Chris's wife, overwhelmed by her husband's death, took her own life by stepping in front of a car sometime later. Hearing this, Peter was filled with dread. He realized that the drunk driver responsible for the accident was none other than his own brother, who became paralyzed after the crash. Peter had no idea that his brother's actions had caused the deaths of 2 people. He understood that the spirit he encountered was likely Chris's wife, seeking revenge for what happened. Though Peter survived that night, he was forever haunted by the experience. He never drove a cab again, unable to forget the terrifying ordeal. The Vanishing Passenger. I've been an Uber driver for many years now, and the story I'm about to tell you is not only scary, but also a bit sad. A few years ago one night, I was called for a pickup from a bar in downtown. It was a typical weekend night, and downtown was bustling with activity. The streets were filled with people enjoying the nightlife, laughter echoing from various bars and clubs. I navigated through the lively streets, eventually arriving at the bar where I was supposed to pick up my passengers. I parked on the side, put on my hazard lights, and waited for my passengers to come out. After a few minutes, the bar door swung open, and 4 people stumbled out. 3 guys and a girl, all around the same age, probably in their early 20s. They were laughing and talking loudly, clearly enjoying their night out. One of the guys, a tall fellow with a scruffy beard, finished his cigarette and got into the front passenger seat. He smelled strongly of alcohol and smoke, but he seemed friendly enough. I glanced at the others as they made their way to the car. The girl, wearing a red dress and high heels, was giggling and holding onto one of the other guys, who had his arm around her shoulders. They seemed to be a couple. The third guy, however, was different. He was quiet, almost withdrawn. He had dark hair that fell into his eyes, and he didn't say a word as he got into the back seat. He kept his head down, lost in his own thoughts. I figured he might have had too much to drink and was just trying to keep it together. The ride started out normally enough. The couple in the back seat were chatting away, laughing about something that had happened earlier at night. The guy in the front seat was trying to make conversation with me, asking me how long I'd been driving for Uber and if I'd had any interesting experiences. I answered his questions politely, but my mind kept drifting to the quiet guy in the back seat. There was something about his silence that felt unsettling. He didn't look up, didn't engage with his friends, and didn't even acknowledge their conversations. It was like he was in his own little world, completely detached from the others. A little later, we reached their destination, a quiet residential neighborhood. The streets were dimly lit, and most of the houses were dark, their occupants presumably asleep. I pulled up to the curb in front of a modest 2-story house with a small front yard. The couple in the back seat were still chatting away, oblivious to the world outside, while the guy in the front seat thanked me for the ride. After every trip, I turn on the light inside my car to make sure no one leaves anything behind. It's a habit I've developed over the years to avoid losing items like phones, wallets, or keys. As I flipped the switch and the car's interior light flickered on, I glanced at the back seat. To my utter shock, the quiet teenager who had been sitting there had vanished. His seat was empty, and there was no sign of him anywhere in the car. My heart raced as I looked around, confused. I hadn't even unlocked the car doors, so it was impossible for him to have gotten out. I quickly turned to the other 3 passengers, my voice trembling slightly. "Did you guys see where the 4th guy went?" I asked. The couple in the back seat stopped their conversation and looked at me, puzzled. "What 4th guy?" the girl asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. There were only 3 of us. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. "The quiet guy who was sitting in the back," I said, my voice shaking. He had dark hair and was keeping to himself the whole ride. The guy in the front seat turned to me, his face pale. "There were only 3 of us," he repeated, looking at his friends for confirmation. They all nodded in agreement, their faces showing no signs of understanding what I was talking about. Feeling a chill run down my spine, I described the missing passenger in detail, his dark hair, his quiet demeanor, and the way he kept his head down. As I spoke, the expressions on their faces changed from confusion to something else. Fear. The girl, her face now ashen, spoke up in a serious voice. "The guy you're describing died in a car accident a few days ago. He was our friend." My blood ran cold. I felt a shiver travel down my spine as the reality of their words sank in. The teenager I had seen, the one who had been sitting quietly in the back seat, was a ghost. A feeling of unease settled over me as I realized I had unknowingly transported a spirit. The three friends got out of the car slowly, still in shock. They murmured their thanks and walked towards the house, their steps hesitant. I sat there for a moment, my mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. Finally, I put the car in gear and drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Shaken by this strange incident, I drove home, thinking all night about what had happened. The encounter left me deeply unsettled, and it was a long time before I could drive past that area again without a sense of dread. The memory of that night lingers with me, a haunting reminder of the inexplicable events that sometimes cross our paths. Haunted Pursuit. A cultural night was going on at the Police Institute's festival. There was a traffic jam due to Uber drivers picking up and dropping off college students. Among them was an Uber driver named Lucas. Lucas usually returns home by 10:00 p.m. on a normal day, but that day he was returning late at 1:00 a.m. As Lucas was driving his car past that point, he saw a large forest ahead of him. To avoid traffic, Lucas took a left turn, assuming it would lead him to the main road. Driving alongside the dense and frightening forest made Lucas a little scared. To distract himself from the forest, he turned on the radio in his car. At first, the radio played fine, but within moments, it started having strange disturbances. Then suddenly, he heard a woman's voice muttering something, so he quickly turned off the radio. As he drove, Lucas's eyes kept darting back to the dark and ominous forest. The trees in the forest were swaying violently due to the strong wind, making it seem like a storm was approaching. Suddenly, he saw a bright light shining from inside the forest. The flashing light kept catching his attention. Lucas was confused and continued to drive straight. Suddenly, a traffic police officer appeared out of nowhere and signaled Lucas to stop. But Lucas's car was going too fast to stop in time, and he passed right through the police officer. When Lucas finally braked and stopped, he was trembling with fear. He thought he had hit someone, but when he looked back, there was no one on the road. Lucas got out of the car and looked around carefully, but he still saw no one. Wanting to leave as soon as possible, he got back into his car and started it again. As he looked into the rearview mirror, he was stunned by what he saw. The traffic police officer was sitting in the back seat of his car. Lucas screamed loudly, and the police officer suddenly grabbed his girlfriend. In the darkness, Lucas couldn't see the officer's face clearly, but upon closer inspection, he noticed that the officer's head was half cut off. Lucas screamed in terror when he saw the deep scratches on the officer's face. The deserted road was empty, with no one in sight. Meanwhile, he saw the same light flickering in the forest again. In a panic, Lucas managed to free his neck from the grip and ran into the forest through the broken wall. Without thinking, he just kept running. After a while, he stopped and realized he was deep inside the forest. The dense trees surrounded him, making it impossible to see the way out. Suddenly, he heard a sound in the distance. It sounded like a disturbance from a radio. Lucas moved towards the sound, and as he got closer, he heard a woman's voice amidst the radio noise. He couldn't believe his ears because the voice was exactly like the one from his car's radio. As he moved closer to the source of the voice, he saw a dim light. The light was coming from a woman's eyes. She was sitting on a tree branch, holding an old broken radio and crying. Seeing her, Lucas was terrified. He thought it would be best to quietly leave, but his foot snapped a dry twig on the ground. The cracking sound echoed through the forest, catching the woman's attention. She looked straight at Lucas, and the sight of her face made his blood run cold. Her face was covered with cuts, and her eyes were glowing blood red. She jumped down from the tree like a wild animal. Lucas, seeing this, felt suffocated with fear and started running back. The woman, who looked like a witch, chased after him with inhuman speed. While running, Lucas saw a building in the distance. He kept running towards it. and after about a mile or so he got closer. It was a police station. When Lucas reached there, he was too shaken to clearly explain what had happened. Somehow, he managed to tell the police officers about his terrifying encounter. To his surprise, the officers didn't seem shocked at all. Instead, they told Lucas he was lucky to be alive. One of the older officers explained that 10 years ago, a boy and a girl in a car had misbehaved with a police officer and sped off on the same road. The police officer chased them, and the pursuit led them into the forest. When the girl finally stopped the car, the police officer promised to make sure she faced severe consequences. The girl, likely intoxicated, lost her temper and stabbed the officer in the neck with her car key. The officer's neck was deeply cut, and blood started pouring out. He was left half dead. In the chaos, the boy's head got injured, and he fled the scene in his car, leaving the girl behind with only an old radio in her hand. No one knows what happened to the girl that night, but it is said that the spirits of the police officer and the girl still haunt that place. Hearing this, Lucas was terrified. He felt grateful to have escaped with his life and decided never to go near that forest again. The midnight ride. Mark checked the time on his phone. Midnight. His daughter would be fast asleep by now, safe at home. He sighed, wishing he could be there to tuck her in. The life of an Uber driver wasn't easy, but it paid the bills and kept a roof over their heads. Detroit's streets were always busy, even at this hour, and tonight was no exception. He turned a corner and spotted a young woman standing on a shadowy street corner. Her face caught the light for a moment, and he saw the bruising in one eye swollen shut. She looked terrified. Mark slowed down and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" he asked. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Drive, please?" Her fear was palpable. Mark felt a pang of empathy. He was a single father, always trying to balance work and family, and he recognized desperation when he saw it. He unlocked the door, and she slid into the back seat, glancing around nervously. "Where to?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Just drive. I'll tell you when to turn." Mark pulled away from the curb, the rain-slicked streets reflecting the neon lights of the city. The car's interior was filled with the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. The woman, Alice, kept her eyes on the rearview mirror, her breathing shallow and erratic. He tried to make small talk to ease the tension. "Rough night?" Alice gave a curt nod. "Just get me away from here." Mark's protective instincts kicked in. "Is someone after you?" She hesitated, then nodded again. "My ex. He's been stalking me. I just need to get to a safe place." Mark's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "We'll get you there. I promise." As they drove, Alice's phone buzzed repeatedly. She glanced at it, and her face grew paler with each message. "He's threatening me," she said, her voice trembling. "He says he knows where I am." Mark's mind raced. "We'll lose him. Hang tight." He took a series of turns, moving away from the main roads and into quieter, more deserted areas. The city center gave way to a maze of industrial warehouses, the dark buildings looming like silent sentinels. "There's a storage unit up ahead," Alice said. "I have evidence against him there. If I can get it to the police, they'll arrest him." Mark nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We'll get it. Stay calm." But calm was the last thing he felt. The black car that had been following them suddenly appeared again, its headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. Mark's heart pounded as he sped up, navigating the labyrinth of warehouses with practiced ease. Alice clung to the seat, her eyes wide with fear. "He's here." Mark took a sharp turn, hoping to lose the tail. "Hold on. I've got an idea." He drove deeper into the warehouse district, weaving through the narrow streets until he found what he was looking for. An alleyway that led to a dead end, except for a narrow passage just wide enough for his car. He took the turn and drove through, the black car unable to follow. They emerged on the other side, and Mark quickly turned off the headlights, parking in the shadows. They watched as the black car sped past, unable to see them. Alice let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." Mark nodded, his own heart rate slowly returning to normal. "Let's get that evidence and put this guy away." But as they approached the storage unit, the sense of danger remained, a constant companion in the darkness. Mark parked the car, the engine's hum fading into the eerie silence of the warehouse district. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, creating a soft, rhythmic patter against the car roof. Alice shivered, her eyes darting to the darkened buildings around them. The air felt heavy, charged with an almost tangible tension. "This way," Alice whispered, pointing to a narrow alley. Her voice was barely audible in the rain. Mark followed her lead, every step echoing against the damp concrete. As they approached the storage unit, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of his vision, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The unit itself looked ordinary enough, but the flickering overhead light cast an unsettling glow. It was as if the darkness were alive, waiting just beyond the reach of the dim bulb. Alice fumbled with the key, her hands shaking. Mark kept watch, his eyes scanning the shadows. He couldn't see anyone, but he felt eyes on them. The sensation was unnerving, like being watched by something unseen. "I got it," Alice said, the lock clicking open. She pushed the door up, the metallic screech echoing through the alley. Inside, the unit was cluttered with boxes and old furniture, with the musty smell of dust and decay filling the air. Alice dug through a box, pulling out a folder. "This is it," she said, her voice tinged with relief. "Everything we need to put him away." Mark glanced around, uneasy. "Let's get out of here. I don't like this place." As they turned to leave, a sudden gust of wind slammed the storage unit door shut. The noise echoed loudly, making both of them jump. Mark's heart raced. "Just the wind," he muttered, more to reassure himself than Alice. But Alice's face had gone pale. "We need to go. Now." They hurried back to the car, the unsettling feeling growing stronger with each step. Mark couldn't shake the sense that they were being followed. The night felt alive with hidden dangers, and the rain now a relentless downpour. As they reached the car, Mark noticed something on the windshield. A single, muddy footprint. It was impossible. They had parked in a secluded spot, away from any foot traffic. The sight sent a chill down his spine. Alice saw it too, her eyes wide with fear. "He's here," she whispered. Mark scanned the area but saw nothing. "Get in," he said, his voice firm. "We're getting out of here." They climbed into the car, and Mark started the engine. The headlights cut through the darkness, but the sense of foreboding remained. As they pulled away, Mark glanced in the rearview mirror. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a shadowy figure standing where they had been parked. But then it was gone, swallowed by the night. They drove in silence. The tension in the car was thick and oppressive. Mark's mind raced, trying to piece together the unsettling events. Was it just paranoia, or were they truly in danger? Alice clutched the folder tightly, her knuckles white. "We have to get this to the police," she said, breaking the silence. "It's our only chance." Mark nodded, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "We will, but we need to be careful. He's closer than we think." Mark's mind was racing as he drove through the rain-slicked streets of Detroit. Alice was clutching the folder like a lifeline, her face a mask of fear and determination. Mark glanced at her, his protective instincts kicking in even harder. He had to get her to safety, but the feeling that they were being watched wouldn't leave him. "Where do we go now?" Alice's voice broke the silence, shaky but resolute. "The nearest police station," Mark replied, trying to sound confident. Inside, he was a whirlwind of worry and doubt. Every turn felt like a gamble, and every shadow a potential threat. They drove in tense silence for a few minutes, the sound of the rain and the wipers being the only noise. Mark's thoughts drifted to his daughter asleep at home. He felt a pang of guilt for not being there, but he pushed it aside. He had to focus. "Thank you for helping me," Alice said suddenly, her voice softer. "You didn't have to." Mark glanced at her. "I couldn't just leave you out there. Besides, you remind me of my daughter. I'd want someone to help her if she was in trouble." Alice nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm just so tired of being scared." "We'll get through this," Mark said, more for himself than her. The police station was only a few blocks away when the black car reappeared in the rear-view mirror. Mark's heart sank. "Hold on," he muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. Alice looked back, her face paling. "It's him." Mark floored the gas, the car lurching forward. The black car followed, its headlights glaring. The streets blurred past as Mark navigated the maze of Detroit's downtown. His mind was a whirl of calculations, searching for an escape. "Turn left here," Alice shouted, pointing to a narrow alley. Mark swerved, the tires screeching on the wet pavement. They barreled into the alley, the black car right on their tail. It was a dead end. "Damn it," Mark hissed, slamming on the brakes. They were trapped. The black car skidded to a stop, and a tall, menacing figure emerged. Alice's ex-boyfriend. He moved with a predator's grace, his eyes fixed on Alice. Mark's mind raced. He had to do something. "Stay in the car," he told Alice, then stepped out into the rain. The ex approached, a sneer on his face. "You really think you can save her?" he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. Mark stood his ground, his heart pounding. "Leave her alone. She's going to the police." The ex laughed, a cold, chilling sound. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Before Mark could react, the ex lunged. They grappled in the rain, the world narrowing to fists and pain. Mark's thoughts were a jumble. He had to protect Alice and get back to his daughter. Alice's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop it." She had stepped out of the car, the folder clutched to her chest. "It's over. I have everything the police need to lock you up." The ex paused, glaring at her. "You think a few papers will stop me?" At that moment of distraction, Mark found his opening. He shoved the ex, sending him stumbling back. Just then, sirens wailed in the distance. The ex's face twisted in rage, but he knew he was beaten. He turned and fled, disappearing into the night. Mark collapsed against the car, breathing hard. Alice rushed to his side, her eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he panted. "Let's get to the police." The sirens grew louder, and moments later, police cars arrived, their lights flashing. Officers rushed out, and Alice handed over the folder, her hands trembling. "This has everything," she said. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." One officer nodded, taking the folder. "We'll take it from here. You're safe now." As the police led them to safety, Mark felt a strange mix of relief and lingering dread. They were safe for now, but the night's events had left a mark. Later, as he drove home, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. He glanced at Alice, who was staring out the window, lost in thought. "You did great," he said softly. "It's over." Alice turned to him, her eyes haunted. "Thank you, Mark, but I have to tell you something." Mark frowned, a chill running down his spine. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "The evidence. It's not just about my ex. There's more. He's part of something bigger. Something dangerous. And now they know you helped me." Mark's heart skipped a beat. The sense of danger wasn't gone. It had just begun. As they drove through the rain-soaked streets, Mark knew their ordeal was far from over. The storm had passed, but the darkness was only just beginning to reveal its true face.